Hello and welcome back to the Championship Crowd podcast. We hope that you are all well and enjoying the sunny weather coming out at the moment and the lockdown restrictions easing. Of course, we're going to be talking about the Championship as usual. I'm joined by Adam. Adam, are you more than all right today? All right? Or is it
Yeah,
anything to add?
no, I'm good, mate. To be fair, obviously Norwich two straight defeats before Saturday, and obviously got the win, and that pretty much looks like we're on course now for the title. So my champagne has been sat a bit too long in the fridge at the minute. Like I thought it was going to be opened up against Watford, and then I thought QPR, and now I'm thinking I have to wait till Reading at home next Saturday, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing that champagne getting open on the podcast, hopefully one week. But you never know. 2 games left. If you lose them, well, we could have. You never know what's going to happen. I'm pleased. I finally got my hair cut. So anyone watching on YouTube, I don't have that crazy hair anymore. But come on, let's talk about the championship. We're going to go into quite a lot of detail later on in the podcast about those lower league teams who could get relegated. But credit where credit's due. Watford, for quite a lot of maybe February time, I was like, nah, Watford are not a threat because they weren't playing well. And we heard last week um, from Mike that he was said that he agreed they weren't playing well that time. But they are promoted. They've finally started playing really well the last few months. Adam, what a season for Watford.
Yeah, obviously their home form has been very consistent all season and by far the best in the league. But it's been that away form. Obviously, early in the season, that was what was kind of dragging them into the playoff race as opposed to most of the top two. But ever since Muniz has come in there, around about the Christmas period, he's turned them round. Obviously, changed the formation, and he's managed to get all the players gelled and they're just performing. And I think what I'd probably say is a lot of the players who you maybe didn't expect to be so key for them this season have really stepped up. I think most people would have expected the likes of Troy Deeney and Andre Gray to be the kind of headline players for Watford, but it's really not been that. It's obviously Sarr is the obviously inevitable one that everyone's going to turn their attention to, but he is obviously by far their best player. But I think obviously, like even Dan Gosling, I mean, he scored a couple of big goals for them since joining from Bournemouth. Obviously, the one against Norwich, which probably did seal promotion realistically, despite obviously needing that win on Saturday to confirm it. But yeah, fair play to them. They will obviously be in the Premier League next season, and obviously it's a different game as to where they were before. Obviously, they were an established Premier League side for many years, but they've now got the sort of the newly promoted side tag attached to them, and let's see how they get on.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a second. We'll go back to what you mentioned, the Norwich game. You obviously had a close eye on that, thinking we're going to win the league. I remember, I think you maybe went out for a few drinks beforehand, pre-celebrating, but it wasn't to be. And it was a 1-0 defeat against Watford. Thoughts on that game?
Yeah, I think what I'd probably say is Norwich had a bit of a sort of hangover of almost effect from Saturday. Obviously, all the players had been celebrating till the early hours of Sunday morning. They only really had sort of 1 day recovery and then straight into a game against effectively the second best team in the league this year, obviously based on placing at the moment. So yeah, it's not the ideal preparation, and Daniel Farke kind of alluded to that in his pre-match press conference that the players obviously would usually be nutritionally prepared for a game like that. But when you're already promoted, you can kind of say, well, give them that. And Watford needed the win. Norwich realistically, okay, they needed the win for the title, but obviously we have enough games left to secure that anyway. And Watford knew a win would pretty much seal the promotion. And obviously Swansea slipped up on that night. Brentford slipped up on that night. So everything went for them, and credit where it's due. You know, they've held their nerve towards the end of the season and they've got the job over the line now.
Yeah, I was relying on a few results going my way, but you didn't help us out there, Adam. I won't take it against you because we didn't do what we should have done. We'll come to Swansea in a bit later. But Watford, when we were talking last week, I said, I don't think you can get confirmed promoted to Mike against Millwall. But little did I know that they were going to beat Norwich. Results have gone their way. Then they played Millwall. Early penalty for Sarr. Thoughts on that game?
Yeah, I think according to Sky, Millwall were actually well in this game, and they are actually giving them a bit of a game for pretty much the full 90. And I was kind of hoping that they might grab one because obviously Norwich done the job against QPR, and if Millwall would have scored in that game, then the title would have been secured on Saturday. But wasn't to be. Watford managed to hold on and grabbed the win that against sort of a Millwall side that obviously had a bit of an upturn in form. Obviously, apart from that Swansea result, they'd been very, very good now since sort of February period. So credit where it's due. They managed to get another home win this season. I think that's now 56 points, I think, at home this year, which is, I believe, one of the best league totals at home for a long time in the Championship. I think I looked back to about 2011, and it's definitely the best one as far back as that. So fair play to Watford. As long as they can keep that next season, their home record, then obviously they'll be all right in the Premier League.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that. So right in the Premier League, do you think next year they'll probably be staying up?
I think it's hard to call them. Obviously, if they obviously manage to hold on to Sarr, I think that's number one, because obviously there will be interest in him inevitably, like there will be Wendy and Aaron's and that at Norwich. Even though you're promoted, these big clubs know that they can come in and steal a player like that for the right money. What I'd probably say is Watford do sort of have a lot of older players maybe in certain positions that maybe need to be sort of the next sort of generation of players need to be brought in, and they need to spend the money wisely to get the right players in, because recruitment was kind of their letdown. I think the season they got relegated from the Premier League, they didn't recruit the right players. And this season they have managed to recruit the right players, and obviously that's paid off and they managed to get themselves promoted. But I think a goal scorer is probably what they need, because they don't really have a striker. Like obviously Norwich have Pukki. Okay, you might not necessarily do it in the Prem, but that'll be something we'll see. But they don't really have that sort of out-and-out striker who's even scored, 15 goals in the Championship this season. So I think that's got to be their number one priority.
Yeah, I think they could be looking, if Brentford don't get promoted, it could be like an Ivan Toney or something like that. We've seen Ollie Watkins do well coming from the Championship. Could Brentford be losing Ivan Toney this season? 29 goals for him. It'll be interesting to see who Watford do come in to get. But also, I think you don't usually actually see this. Teams from the Premier League going straight back up. And we do see it in Norwich's case because you are the masters at that. But for Watford, very good for them to come back up. Do you think the fact that COVID came in and then these teams didn't want to sell their players at like a price that Premier League clubs wanted to buy them at could have made a big impact? So I think usually you see these teams come down, and in the Premier League clubs would then buy quite a lot of their players. Because of COVID, their price tags went down. Do you think that's actually helped these teams? Because we've got Bournemouth as well. Could have all three of those teams getting promoted.
I think it's definitely been a factor, but I'd probably say they all lost players anyway. I mean, Norwich lost Godfrey and Jamal Lewis, and Watford lost Decore, who I think is probably one of the best sort of midfielders in the Premier League over the last few years. And even Bournemouth lost Callum Wilson and Josh King and those kind of players. So I think there's definitely an element to it. I don't think Norwich would have managed to hold on to the likes of Buendia in normal times. I think he would have been snatched away for probably a lower cut fee, and COVID has meant that these clubs can't afford to ship out 30-40 million quid for a player that's now playing in the Championship. But no, I think it's just been kind of, obviously they've managed to retain the squads, but I think a lot of the teams in the Championship just probably on a level just haven't been good enough this season and consistent enough. I mean, Brentford were always tipped for promotion at the start of the season, and they've retained a good squad still, but again, they've just not been consistent enough. And obviously these clubs that have had it, they've been relegated, so they've had to change the mentality from losing to winning, which is actually quite a tough thing to do. But they managed to do it, Norwich and Watford, and obviously Bournemouth could complete the treble of sides that got relegated and go straight back up.
Yeah, I'm hoping that they don't, but I think they are looking strong in that playoff position. Hisco Muniz came in around December time. I think for his first game before the match, he played Sweet Caroline to cheer the players up before they went onto the pitch, motivate them together. I think he actually still does that before every game now. What an influence he has had. At the start, I didn't think he was that great, but as time has gone, he's really got those players playing, and Watford fans have been loving him.
Yeah, no, he's done an absolutely brilliant job. Obviously, the previous manager was criticised for not changing the formation, and he's obviously, effectively bit the bullet and done that, and he's changed the formation, and it's paid dividends for them because they've obviously got promoted. So fair play to Watford, and look forward to playing them next year in the Premier League. Last
one, Norwich promoted, Watford promoted. Who's got a better chance of staying up next season?
I'll be honest, obviously I've got a bias towards Norwich, but I actually genuinely do believe that we actually have the best chance of all the teams there. I think the foundations at the back are pretty well set. I think obviously we've got a structure now. with Farker and Stuart Webber. And I think if they get the recruitment right in the areas that need strengthening, so I think we need to get Ollie Skip back on loan. I think that's crucial. If we manage to get him, I would be very confident to say we'll stay up. But yeah, I just think probably another centre-half, another striker, and I would be confident to say Norwich will stay up. I just think Watford, maybe Muniz, he's not got that Premier League experience as a manager yet, where Farker's learned his lesson from the one season he's already been in there. So yeah, I think the fact he's got the experience in the Premier League, where Bournemouth, even if Bournemouth went up, obviously Woodgate is again an unexperienced manager at that level. So that would probably be the only reason I'd sway it slightly towards us anyway.
Yeah, Ollie Skip would be a very good loan from Tottenham. But you never know Tottenham's situation going into next season. It might be one of those towards the end of the thing, depending on their new manager. Ben Gibson, no confirmed, coming next season from Burnley official. So being on loan this season, but having a transfer there next year. So I do actually agree with you. I was laughing because obviously you're saying it from your biased point of view, but I do think Norwich have been there. They've had that league. They're obviously this yo-yo team, but I think they do the way their club's been run the last few years in terms of getting these players in and keeping these players. And yeah, you've had that season in the Prem. You know what it's all about, and I think you're going to be ready. I think you're going to be ready this time. And yeah, I think you're going to have a strong season. It could be around a mid-table season, probably like, I think you and us finished on the same points in that 2012 to 2011 to 12 season. So it could be something similar around mid-table for you guys as well. Playoffs though, moving on to those. Reading, they had a chance to sneak into the playoffs midweek, 0-0 against Luton. And then Sunday, 2-2 against Swansea. They went into that game knowing they had to win, and they drew. Reading, unlucky. What's your thoughts on them?
Yeah, obviously they've just been inconsistent, haven't they? Really, they had that amazing start, which gave them half a chance of being in the playoffs. I think, you take away those first 7-8 games of the season, they would be mid-table to fight in relegation rather than where they currently are. But obviously they got those wins at the start of the season, and ever since Christmas, they've just not been consistent enough. They lose too many games, they pick up too many draws, and again, Saturday they led the game, or Sunday, sorry, they led the game 1-0, and if they manage to hold on to that, then that's would be enough to at least give them half a chance going into those last couple of games, especially knowing that Swansea have got probably a couple of quite tough fixtures really away at Watford, obviously, and Derby, who are still got something to play for this season. They would have still had half a chance, but obviously they let that lead slip. And okay, they got the late equaliser, but that obviously wasn't enough to keep their season alive. And their concerns would be they're probably going to lose a lot of players in the summer. I think the likes of Elise and Meite and Zhao will be definitely looked for by other Championship Premier League clubs, and that could be an issue for Reading. But fair play. It's been a good season for them. You can't knock them for that.
Yeah, because they've got these young players and they've had this young squad, and you think that's going to be good going into next season. But most of these young players probably not going to be there next season. So they're going to have to rebuild their team, and it's going to take maybe a few more years to get back into that playoff position. But I love it. 2 seasons, we've confirmed our playoff position at the Medeski Stadium after, remember, last year's sensational final day, and then also on the weekend, 2-2. Everyone's talking about Andre Ayew or one-man team. Of course, if your best player comes on, you're going to do better, aren't you? I think that's natural. Bendir came on for you guys. Sarr came on for Watford. Everyone bangs on about it, but he's a key player, I guess.
Yeah, no, obviously for Swansea, that's definitely someone they need to be keeping fit for the playoff push. I think Swansea have got to be careful these next couple of games. Now they've got the position tied up. You don't want to be losing any of your sort of main men going into that playoff race. And that's going to be interesting how these teams that obviously have now all secured a playoff place approach these last 2 games, or in Brentford's case, 3 games, knowing that ultimately these next 2 or 3 games don't really mean anything other than trying to fight for what position they're going to finish in the playoffs and who they'll play in the semis. But obviously they don't want to be losing key men to suspensions or even injuries before those fixtures.
Yeah, so 1 point splits all 4 of those teams. You think that it sets it up to be a very, very good playoffs. But you do have a few of those teams in very good form and a few not so good form. Brentford, who weren't on good form, got a good result against Bournemouth, and it could be pivotal going into the playoffs because they know they might be playing them either in two legs or in that final. What was your thoughts on that game?
Yeah, obviously the red card, I think, was, most people would have expected that to have then given Bournemouth the momentum and the advantage to go and win this game. But obviously Brentford defied the odds and managed to get the winner. And it could be a big winner, because I honestly think with the fact they've now got the game in hand, I would definitely put Brentford in pole position to finish in third place, which more than likely would mean they'll probably avoid Bournemouth in the semi-final, which I think that's probably the one you want to avoid at this stage in the season. Obviously, that was Bournemouth's first defeat in 6-7 games. So yeah, they're going to try and obviously get a couple of wins on the board, you think, Bournemouth, before they head into the playoffs. So I think for Brentford, that was a massive result, even though obviously they can't now get second place. I think in terms of the playoffs, that's a huge win, because obviously they've got Rotherham during the week, and at home you would probably expect them to get all 3 points again.
Yes, I think Brentford, they probably are set for that third place. I know they've got Watford still next week, but Watford may be celebrating the promotion, so they might not be on fire. So I think great result for Brentford, because they hadn't been firing recently. They had been slipping up a few games. I think Swansea, of course, haven't won again in 3 games now. We could be struggling, and I'm looking at that. And as you say, I think Bournemouth are still that form team. I don't think they need to be going. Obviously, they're going to be trying to win these next few games, but I think from a perspective of Brentford and Swansea, who have been a bit under par recently, I think these next 2 games or 3 games for Brentford are more important, just to set that momentum up, get that form going, get back to winning ways. I look at Barnsley, I look at Bournemouth. I think they've been playing really well recently. They've been getting those results. Probably not as crucial for them. So do you think it could be a case that maybe teams like Swansea and Brentford might be going for these games more, whilst the other 2, they're quite happy in how they're playing? They might be resting their players going into these games?
Yeah, I think more than likely, obviously, if Brentford secure a win, I think they might go more sort of full strength on Tuesday night against Rotherham. But I think if they manage to secure that win, I would be comfortable to say, even if they rest a few players, they'll probably finish third. Bournemouth, obviously, they've got a couple of easier fixtures. They've got, I think, Wycombe and Stoke, so you'd probably expect them to win at least one of those, probably 2. Well, I'd say Swansea probably have the hardest 2 fixtures remaining. Obviously, Derby need a win to at least sort of give their survival chances a massive boost. And obviously, Watford could still be playing for the title potentially going into that last game of the season, so they'll be fired up. And obviously, they have the best home record in the whole division. So for Swansea, they really need to go for these games to me to keep the momentum going, because they could potentially suffer 2 defeats against sides that needs sort of a win, and that could be damaging then going into that game, especially if they end up with Bournemouth, who I would say are probably the favourites in the whole of the playoffs at the moment to get the promotion back to the Premier League.
Yeah, I think, if we lose our 2, then it'll probably be Brentford, because Brentford you'd expect, to finish in third. So I'm looking at it. Obviously, I want to win. We want to win our games because we need momentum. We need to get some form. But I'd happily drop down to that 6th position. So then we play Brentford rather than Bournemouth, because I think over 2 legs, Bournemouth are just unstoppable. Brentford, obviously, they beat us last year, but we weren't prepared. We amazing to come into the playoffs, and in some ways amazing again to get into the playoffs this year. And I think even though we've been out of form recently and we've had this massive different form, and people like Swansea not playing that well, at the start of the season we were not meant to be up here. We weren't meant to be up here. I thought mid-table would be a good finish, because the amount of players that we lost, the people that we had on loans, and a few other people, it's pretty good to keep this going. Steve Cooper, 100th game on the weekend, and it's 2 playoff position finishes for him as a Swansea manager. Even though a few doubts in our minds recently over his management, I think he's done a great job, and he's got to get credit for that. But it will be interesting to see who plays who in the playoffs. Oh, yeah. So what are you thinking? Brentford, Swansea in the semi-final, Bournemouth, Barnsley on the fixtures to come?
Yeah, I think it's hard to call. I think Barnsley obviously will probably be the side that more likely to rest their players, just because they don't have such a big playing squad available to them. When their momentum really has been amazing ever since Christmas. I think they've only lost back 2 games in about 20 And weirdly enough, they came against Sheffield Wednesday and Coventry, which you probably didn't expect them to lose those games. So, yeah, I think Barnsley are more likely to rest players, which means, they're probably going to have probably the fittest squad going into the playoffs. Obviously, they are the underdogs. And, I would go as far to say they'll play Bournemouth. I think Barnsley will finish 5th. I think Swansea will finish 6th. I actually think you'll suffer at least one defeat, I think, in the last 2, which will see you drop down and play Brentford. But as we've seen, Brentford again are not being the most consistent, and they're probably the most favourable team to play in the playoffs in some ways, because I think Barnsley obviously have been on an amazing run of form, and Bournemouth similarly have been on an amazing run of form and have the best playing squad on paper of the teams in the playoffs.
Yeah, and Brentford have been fairly reliant on Ivan Toney. Only 1 goal in 6. Could Timo Pukki, 3 goals behind him in the Golden Boot, banging 2 hat-tricks to top that table at the end of the season?
I wish I could say yes, but I don't think that's going to happen. If he just scored on Saturday, he had a clear through chance where he should have scored. I think if he buries that, then I'd give him half a chance. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to say, Ivan Toney, you will be picking up the Golden Boot at the end of the season.
There you go, Ivan Toney, happy man indeed. Now it's the big one. It's the teams that don't want to be in the Championship next year. They don't want to be going up. They want to be going down to League One. What is happening? Who should we start with? Let's start with Derby. Derby. What are they doing? Rooney, do you want to stay in the league? Do you want to be a manager? What is he doing? 2 defeats this week, Adam. 3-0 against Preston. And then another defeat on the weekend. What is happening to Derby?
Yeah, it's now 5 straight defeats, and the only win that really came before that was the victory over Luton. They had another run before that where it was just defeats and draws, and it's not looking good, is it? Like, you look at their last 2 fixtures, obviously the Swansea one, okay, you can say that Swansea, are securing the playoffs now, but obviously they are a side that are still in the top 6 this season, so that's away from home going to be a tricky game. And then obviously they have got that game against Sheffield Wednesday, which, with the fact they're on such a losing mentality and they've got quite a few injuries at the moment. I know like Lee Gregory, who they bought in from Stoke I believe it's on loan. He's obviously a forward man. He's obviously injured, and they've had a lot of injuries all season, and that's definitely been a factor. But I don't think that's an excuse. I think they've got enough players there to be well clear now. If they'd have just won at least one of these games in this sort of woeful run they've had, they wouldn't be anywhere near it, because I think you could safely say Rotherham and Sheffield Wednesday will already be relegated. But instead, they're like, let's make this interesting and potentially go into the last game of the season needing something against Sheffield Wednesday to actually survive, especially with Rotherham's 4 games in hand and the fact they do play Sheffield Wednesday on the last game of the season as well.
Yeah, we'll go more in detail about those games in a minute, because it is going to be an interesting one with those last 2 games. I'll quickly run through that table. So Derby, 44 games played, 43 points. Rotherham, with those 2 games in hand, after 42, have 39 points. Sheffield Wednesday also on 39 points after 44. But Derby, going back onto the 5 defeats in a row, 1 win in 13 games. They had a 9 points clear after I think they won 6 out of 8 games with 15 games to go. And they've just gone completely downhill. We talked about Rooney in terms of he's never been down at the bottom, has he, in his playing career? Is that a factor? What are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, what I'd probably say is they've also got a playing squad that's, again, not really used to being in a relegation battle. I mean, Derby are a side that I always associate with the playoffs and bottling the playoffs. They're kind of just one of those teams that always seem like they're in the top 6 and unfortunately lose out. But this season's been far from that. Obviously, they've got issues with the ownership there, which, that is stemming from the top. Obviously, they've had management issues this season with Philip Cocu losing his job, and then Rooney came in, sort of had a bit of a resurgence. And then, as we've sort of seen ever since, he's been on a bit of a downturn of form again. And he just looks a bit of a lonely figure in the dugout. I mean, I saw it on Saturday there when Birmingham scored the late winner there. I don't really know how I don't think his reactions to games are always the best. I think if they take the lead, he's almost kind of trying to protect that lead, and rather than probably, because he's just not got the experience in management to know how to deal with games and see games out. And that's definitely having a factor this season. Because actually against Norwich, they were quite good a couple of weeks back. They played some good football, especially with the injuries they've had. But yeah, with the fact that Rotherham have got those games in hand, and his mentality needs to change quick, and Derby need at least one win from the last two.
Yeah, so going a bit more into that Birmingham game, they're 1-0 up, and it is that factor that they've got this lead, protect your lead, put your bodies on the line. They were actually doing that, to be fair. There was a few good blocks and a few good saves. But then when that goal went in, I think from a throw-in, kind of typical Birmingham, and it went in, and then it went down, and they conceded again. And yeah, they were doing their best for a good 40 minutes or so to block every shot and do all of that jazz. But then in the second half, Birmingham got their goal, and then they got another. Derby, what can you do to protect a lead? Surely they know Birmingham. They were already safe. They're not playing for this. They should have more desire, maybe, or they just a team that are severely lacking confidence.
I mean, I've just looked at the substitutions, and Derby made their first substitution in the 75th minute, which is like, that was just after, 15 minutes after Birmingham had scored the equaliser, which is like, well, why has he not made a substitution straight away, an attacking change? Because they need to win this game. A draw's no good. Like, at this point in the season, a win would have probably secured their safety. Instead, he's bringing on midfielders around about the 75th minute. And it's only then, when Birmingham score the winner, that he's making some attacking changes in bringing on Patrick Roberts and Kamil, I don't even know how you pronounce his surname, the Polish winger anyway. And I just think to yourself, why has he not made those attacking changes at 1-1? Why has he made them in the 87th minute when they've already conceded? And their defensive positioning for these goals was absolutely all over the place. And whether you can put that down to Rooney being a striker, he can't really coach the defensive side of the game, or whether their defensive coach has just not got them very well defensively drilled. But yeah, they've got problems there. And I mean, for the sake of, drama in the Championship, it'd be great if they lose and a few teams get a few wins and make it interesting for the last game of the season. But Derby need to turn up against Swansea, because if they don't, I feel like another defeat could really be like a bit of a sword in the heart, really, and just end their season completely. Because I think Rotherham will get a win somewhere, and I honestly do think they'll have enough in them to get at least 6 points. So yes, it's going to be interesting.
It's going to be very interesting. We will now turn over to Rotherham then. They've got 2 games in hand as well as the other 2. We'll talk about those games. But they're just not helping themselves either, are they? 4 defeats in a row. And I think they keep on defeating. If 3 of them maybe 1-0 as well. And it's not that it's just the fact that it's not scoring. And you think going into these last few games, surely they want to put more effort into scoring goals or just giving your all. Like all of these teams, I want to shake them. I'm thinking, motivate yourselves. You're about to get relegated. Or is it one of those things that, fair play to Rotherham, they didn't really have a squad. They were predicted to go down this season at the start of the season, and they just don't have enough in them? Or do they need to find that extra bit, which I thought they did have, which I thought Rotherham of all teams, probably the team that have shown this season, they've got results against the big teams in some big games. I just think last 4, they had a chance. They've got a massive chance because of Derby, and they've lost the last 4 games.
You not just think they've been unlucky, though. I feel like a lot of their games, obviously, as you just alluded to, the 1-goal margin, but there has been some controversial decisions that have gone against them. I'll go back to that Middlesbrough game on Wednesday night, last week, and a red card for Matt Crooks, I believe it was. How did you view that one? Do you think that was a red card?
It was ridiculous, wasn't it? As in, these days, you just don't know what's a red card, do you? If you look at it, his eyes are constantly on the ball. I'm not sure, he probably maybe feels that defenders come in behind him, but he's looking at the ball. He's coming back at the ball. Maybe the elbow flicks him, I'm not sure. I think it was more his actual head that connects with the other person's head rather than an elbow. Middlesbrough guy, obviously his head's going to be hurt if collided with someone, but come on, that's pathetic. Middlesbrough not really playing for much. Come on, just tell the referee that's not a red card. Obviously, it's football, so no one's ever going to do that. But I just feel for Rotherham, and I just feel referees in this scenario. He's got to definitely think it's a red card to give that red card because Rotherham are playing for something. Middlesbrough are not. I know they're trained not to think about these things, but surely the guy, you must think it's a red card, the referee. But watching it a few times over, I just don't see it. I think that's so harsh. The eyes, you can see his eyes are constantly on the ball. I wonder if that was in the Prem, would they have overturned it? Probably not, just because it's so corrupt. But a crucial goal, a crucial red card to concede after scoring early. I think it was the 3rd minute, and they could have saw out that game. You never know what would have happened. So really harsh, Rotherham, because those 3 points would have been massive.
I feel for them. I think the Barnsley game more. I think I've just looked at the stats and they had 7 shots on target to Barnsley's 2 shots on target. In any other game on the expected goal stat, they would be expected to score 2.19 goals and Barnsley would be expected to score 1 goal. So it's just not going for them. They're not getting the rub of the green at the moment. Obviously, controversial goal as well on Saturday. The keeper went off injured after the goal within 2 minutes. They've got collision with the goal scorer and it's just not happening, is it? They're just so unlucky. They just can't seem to get that chance that will fall for them, and they just concede sort of late goals and refereeing decisions are going against them. And I feel for Rotherham because it is so hard when they're sort of built on a team togetherness and team spirit, and it feels like every single time they kind of get that spirit going and they feel like they're going to get the win, and then something just seems to go against them, and it's hard to pick yourself up from that because you feel like everyone's against you and you've just got no hope. But I really do feel they've got a chance. If they need a win this week, I think that would really boost their chances of survival, especially if Derby obviously fall to a defeat against Swansea. So this week's massive for Rotherham, and they just got to keep the togetherness up, believe that they've got it in them because the performances have been good. And that's probably what I'd say for them as opposed to Derby. The performances haven't been good. So you'd rather be a Rotherham fan in that regard than you would a Derby fan who, despite the 4-point cushion, obviously they do only have 2 games left. The Rotherham's 4 games left, and they're not performing very well, Derby, where Rotherham are. So we'll see.
I think you touched on it. That I think Rotherham's perspective, they are doing those performances, but then you also can look at it and think that they're constantly doing these performances where they probably should be getting more, but they're not. And then is there something more they need to be looking at? Should they be more clinical, amazing those expected goals? Because I think previously they hadn't been creating those chances, but now recently they've managed to create these chances. And Barnsley was always going to be a hard game, let's not get it wrong, but to limit Barnsley to only 2 shots and then have more themselves is incredible, really, from Rotherham's perspective. But then they've got to take their chances and they're not. And is it mentally that they're so close now? They tend to always get these results when it looks like they're down and out. And then they give us some hope and think, oh yeah, let's talk about Rotherham. They could potentially stay up. And then when it gets closer, then they go on these losing 4-game losing defeat run now. And it constantly, when they're down and out, they then get the result. But then when they're close, is it because of pressure? I don't know. But a team that is loving it, and a team that could capitalise for the first time in a while. Well, yeah, but they did lose on Saturday, but then they've got a few other results. For the first time in a while, Sheffield Wednesday, if they didn't have their points deducted, they would be out of the relegation zone, sitting only 4 points now off Derby. They don't have the benefit of games in hand. They do have a benefit of somewhat picking up some results recently, a win in midweek. Could they push that for that survival position?
It's another one of these teams that's just been so unlucky. Obviously, I go back 3 games ago and they conceded that late equaliser at home to Bristol City. If they held on to that, they're 2 points closer to the target. And even on Saturday against Middlesbrough, they obviously got the equaliser, and at one point they had the momentum, and then obviously the sucker punch came and they conceded and then conceded again, unfortunately. And, even that, I'll go as far back to that QPR game 5 games ago. And again, they equalised in that game and you thought, right, now they need to build on this, and they end up losing 4-1. And it just feels like, again, they're one of these sides that they've just not got the sort of mentality to hold on to a win, or hold on to, well, even just grab an equaliser and not hold on to it. And that's going to kill them. But what I would say, they've got Forest at home on Saturday. That's a huge game. Their home form recently, obviously got the win against Blackburn, the win against Cardiff. They've generally been quite good at home. If they can come out of that game with a win, and Derby slip up and Rotherham slip up, they go into that last game of the season. I think that's what's the advantages is the fact they played Derby County on the last game of the season. And that's crucial because if they can get 2 wins, obviously, and providing that Derby lose against Swansea, they will finish above Derby this season. So despite the points deduction, they have still got, well, the slimmest of chances to survive, very, very slim. But they need Rotherham and Derby to maintain this poor performance and poor run that they're on. And they can potentially capitalise, but I don't expect them to.
Yeah, we say slim chances, but the rate it's going, Rotherham and Derby don't look like they want to win. So it might not be as slim as you think. They obviously had that, 5-0 victory against Cardiff, and we thought that's going to project them, but then they went on to lose their next 2. And then, as you say, that Bristol City game could be very, very costly. 10 men to letting a late goal was just really costly for them. But you never know. You never know in the Championship. We'll go on now to the fixtures and talk about them a bit more. Brentford, we've mentioned it for Rotherham on Tuesday night. This is one of their games in hand, and then we'll come on to their Luton game in hand as well. First of all, Brentford. Could they be in a position that they're in the playoffs, secured in the playoffs now, maybe rest a few players, or is it too early for that? And Rotherham could be facing a fully fit and well Brentford team away from home.
Brentford actually haven't lost in quite a while. Their last defeat was against Norwich on the 3rd of March. They've just got a bit of a drawing sort of special.
Fair amount of draws, yeah.
That's been the major issue for Brentford. It's ultimately the reason why they're not in the top 2 and why they're basically now secured in the playoffs. But you would expect them to beat Rotherham at home. I think even if Brentford put out a second team, because of Rotherham's sort of, quite small squad, they've obviously been utilised a lot recently, obviously having to play all these games to catch up from sort of the COVID issues earlier in the season. It's definitely taken a toll on Rotherham. I feel like that's probably one of the sort of things that's going against them at the minute is maybe those chances. It's just a little bit of fatigue at times, and it's going to be a tricky one. Ultimately, Rotherham would probably take a point. In some ways, I would say Brentford, they want to win this game to probably secure 3rd place and give them the best chance of probably avoiding Bournemouth in the playoffs. But it's a massive game. I think Brentford will rest a few players. But then again, it's like, even Ivan Toney's, as you just alluded to, only scored 1 goal in 6. So do they want to put him in for this game, thinking, right, Rotherham, they're a lower team. Can we try and stuff them 3 or 4-0, get Toney a few goals, get his confidence up before the game? So I think there's probably an argument both ways there as to what way Brentford approach this game.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think it will be very hard with Rotherham's form, but they have done well against big teams, if I remember rightly, this season. And you just never know. It could be one of those things that they come out, they just give it their all. The thing that we're thinking they should be doing at this stage of the season, which we haven't seen in the last few games, they could do it. And they've got a home game, their last home game of the season, against Blackburn on the weekend. That's probably the game out of all of them, because it's at home. I think they need 3 points there. Obviously, we'll mention it now, actually. Fair play to Blackburn. 5-2 victory on the weekend was very good. So Blackburn fans listening in, well done. But Blackburn, surely they must see that as they're going to win that. They need to win that if they want to stay up.
100%. Yeah, obviously Blackburn. To be fair, Blackburn, as you we said, all sort of the last month or two, they just seem like, even though their season's over, they seem to be kind of quite convinced they need to keep getting wins and draws, and they picked up some really good results actually in the last couple of months. But I would say obviously Rotherham need this game more. They are at home, and obviously they beat QPR quite recently, which are kind of another team in that sort of mid-table bracket where, you would have expected quite a difficult game, but they managed to pick up the 3-1 win. So they kind of got to, effectively replicate that QPR game in this one to give themselves the best opportunity. I think especially if Derby obviously fall to a defeat against Swansea, they'll be keeping a close eye on that game, because if they manage to narrow that gap to one point before sort of those last 2 games for Rotherham in the season, the fact they obviously managed to play their game there in midweek against Luton as well the following week before the final game of the season, they could actually have the motivation to be out of the relegation zone before that final game of the season. So yeah, but obviously what goes against them is the fact that Derby do have Sheffield Wednesday on the last game of the season. So that's a massive game, and if one of those teams picks up a result in that game, again, that goes against Rotherham. because one of them two teams will at least pick up they will either both pick up a point or they'll both get all three. So it's going to be a difficult one to call.
Yeah, it's they've got Luton and Cardiff as well, and it's these teams that we think they're not playing for anything at this stage of the season. Could they be getting results there? But as you say, they just need to be in a position. They could even be out of the relegation zone going into that last game. 2 away games against Luton and Cardiff, but they need to get those results. How many points of Brentford, Blackburn, Luton, Cardiff, realistically, do you think Rotherham will have or get?
I think they might get 6. I'm going to go for 6. I think they'll beat Blackburn at home, and I think they'll win one of the 2 away games to give themselves half a chance. I think they've just been a bit unlucky recently. Things have obviously gone against them. And I think that will, give them almost that extra motivation and determination to be like, right, these things have gone against us. We're going to prove you all wrong and get some results there. So I would expect them to get 6 points, but I'm still not 100% sure that will be enough, just because I think Derby or Sheffield Wednesday will get enough results to relegate Rotherham.
There you go. Adam Harvey thinks 6 points. I think 5. I think they might just pick up a few draws there, maybe get a win. I don't know, it'll be hard, but 5 or 6 points means Derby know if they draw their 2 games, they won't be better off because Rotherham's got a better goal difference. So they need to win one of those games, Swansea or Sheffield Wednesday. Swansea perspective, I think this is a team that will probably lose to because they're low down. I guess we're now secured in that playoff position, and I think Derby could be very fortunate to be coming to the Liberty Stadium, knowing that we're safe in the playoffs now. We may give Ayew a further little rest, maybe give him like a half or 2, just because we need to wrap him up in cotton wool for the playoffs. That I think Derby could be coming to the Liberty and thinking, this is 3 points up for grabs.
In some ways, I actually probably give Derby a better chance against Swansea than I do Sheffield Wednesday, just because I have a feeling that last game of the season, Derby haven't dealt with pressure very well this season, as we're seeing now in this awful run they're having. They just can't seem to get that one win that would pretty much relegate Sheffield Wednesday and Rotherham. Derby, to me, whatever happens between Sheffield Wednesday and Rotherham, as long as Derby get one win, I think they'll survive, in my opinion. But they just need to get that win against Swansea. As you kind of just said, Swansea have really got nothing left to play for this season until the playoffs start. So that will definitely go into their sort of favour. And obviously they beat Swansea earlier on in the season in the reverse fixture. So that will definitely give them a little bit of extra confidence as well. They've got a few of their better players coming back from injury as well. So things don't always have to be completely negative for Derby going into this game. They need to win. That's simple as that. They need to win.
They need a win indeed. So if they did get a win, that would rule Sheffield Wednesday out of it. But Sheffield Wednesday they need to win these next 2 games because they're 4 points adrift at home to Nottingham Forest on the weekend. Probably again another team that are not playing for much and haven't been doing that well recently. Quite a lot of draws from them. Haven't won in their last 4 or 5 games or so. At home to Nottingham Forest. That they should probably win because they need to win, or will they feel the pressure?
I mean, Sheffield Wednesday actually have the 13th best home record in the division, so they're actually mid-table in terms of home points this season. So their problems are away from home. So on that basis, as we've seen recently, obviously demolished Cardiff, got the win against Blackburn. If Sheffield Wednesday can turn up, I think Forest are there for the taking. I think obviously Forest are probably preparing themselves for next season now. They need a bit of a rebuild, I think, in the summer. They were probably expected to be up the top, Nottingham Forest this season. Obviously had a really good year last year, slipped out to Swansea on the last game of the season in the playoffs. So they definitely want to be building for next season. So that will definitely give Sheffield Wednesday a little bit of hope going into this game. And then I think what they need to know is the fact they played Derby on the last game of the season. They need to get that drilled into the players before this game. Say, look, win this game. Let's give ourselves a chance going into that last game of the season where we've seen it before, the great escapes. We've seen it with the likes of Bolton, Birmingham. We've seen it before. So why can't they go into that last game with a win against Forest and then go to Derby and pick up all 3 points? And providing that Rotherham don't do the business in their few games, then they will stay up.
It should be the manager, Adam, that motivation. Why can't we? The great escape. Can they do it? Hoping that we pay Sheffield Wednesday and Rotherham some favours. So it not against Derby fans or anything against that, just so it makes it more dramatic going into that last game of the season. So here we are, the last game of the season. If Sheffield Wednesday win against Nottingham Forest and Derby either draw or draw or lose against us, then it could come to that last game. Derby versus Sheffield Wednesday. Derby are at home. So we talked about Sheffield Wednesday's good home record. It means their away record is pretty poor because they're in that low position. Can they get a result away to Derby, or at Pride Park will Derby show some pride?
Yeah, so Sheffield Wednesday have got the worst away record in the whole division. Only 14 points on the road this season. 4 wins, 2 draws. So that is definitely the root of their problem. It's why they are where they are. I think the 6-point deduction, all right, you can say they would be outside of the relegation zone at the moment, but ultimately they still have been very, very poor this season. But yeah, obviously Derby, their home record isn't great either. They've got the 19th best home record in the division. So again, they're not particularly great at Pride Park, which, you know, you probably wouldn't be expecting to sort of see that to start the season. Pride Park's usually a very difficult place to go. So yeah, this could be set up for a real blockbuster between a side that's terrible at home versus a side that's terrible away. And ultimately it could be a one game scenario which determines whether you play League One football away at Cambridge next season or whether you're playing away to Sheffield United. I think that's obviously what this game has on it, as well as obviously the money factor and the fact that fans will be back hopefully in stadiums next year. So, you know, the fans obviously will be hoping they'll be in the Championship. So it's a massive game, but obviously Rotherham are also a little bit of a determinant in this because they can ultimately blow both these sides out of the water if they pick up all maximum points. Doesn't matter what Derby and Sheffield Wednesday do, as long as Rotherham do their own business.
Yeah, there you go. So you're tipping Cambridge to at least win one of their last 2 games. They do look like they're going to go up from League Two, don't they, to League One. That could be interesting as well. But it is going to be so interesting, that last game, isn't it? I just think, as you touched on, I think Derby are more inclined to feel that pressure than Sheffield Wednesday. And, it's going to be so good. We'll be discussing it, hopefully, more detail next week in terms of that, because we hope for him to be in a position that Swansea get a draw or win against Derby. To me, it could be around 1 point away from Rotherham, a few points away from Sheffield Wednesday, going into that last game of the season. So hopefully next week, we're going to be hearing maybe from at least one of those fans to see what they think going into the last game of the season. If Derby do beat Swansea, I'm very sorry for the rest of the Championship, because there probably won't be much going into that last game of the season. But hoping that there is something to play for going into that last game of the season. Also, just to touch on, I guess, Brentford this weekend might want to get the result against Watford to show they should have been up in the Premier League.
Yeah, obviously they'll fancy themselves at home against Watford, who might, take the foot off the pedal now. Obviously, they can still win the title, but I think it's probably very much, a foot in the door for Norwich now in terms of winning the title. So Watford will probably be just kind of approaching these games knowing that they'll be ready for Premier League football, as opposed to worrying about whether they can beat Swansea and Brentford, because more than likely they'll be playing them in a more meaningful game in the Premier League next year, potentially.
They might be. We'll wait and see. So, guys, have a listen to that podcast. Thank you very much for listening in, as usual. Hopefully next week we are going to be back again to discuss those going into something towards the end of the season. We'll wait and see, though. You never know. Swansea, knowing us, will probably mess it all up, and Derby, we safe from from going down. But we'll wait and see. Fingers crossed for results. Adam, any last notes?
Well, thank you. We finally hit 200 followers on Twitter, which I was very, very happy about last week when I saw that. So thank you for finally getting us there. The next target, obviously, is probably 250, 300. We're going to keep going. It's been really good in terms of the engagement. Obviously, recently we're doing well. So thank you for everyone for their support. And hopefully we'll be able to get you some good guests, hopefully, ahead of the sort of end of the season and the playoffs. So we're trying behind the scenes. And as I say, go watch us on WD Sports. Obviously, we're on there every single week, so give them a follow and a subscribe. And just listen to us on all the usual platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all of that jazz. And have a good week. Hopefully, we're sat here next week with something to play for in the Championship on the last game of the season, because I don't really want a last game of the season where it's just a bit like, well, nothing's going to happen. And hopefully we'll have the champagne out next week on this podcast, because Norwich are going to beat Reading on the weekend, and Wendy will be crowned best player in the Championship, and Pookie will score a hat-trick to give him a chance at getting the golden boot, and everything will be lovely and rosy.
Yes, there you go. So if there isn't anything to play for going into the last games of the season, you're thinking, we might give the Championship Crowd podcast a rest this week because they can't really talk about much. Come on, watch it, see the champagne. Hopefully Adam will be celebrating. Anyways, guys, have a good week. See you next week.